Welcome to Taylor Wood Crafts. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make an epoxy resin river charcuterie board using Craft Resin epoxy resin products. I'll be combining wood and resin with dried flowers from a wedding bouquet to create that special keepsake to last a lifetime. I'll be combining a variety of Craft Resin products along with their UV resin kit, their Mica Powder, which contains 30 different colours, their deep pour resin, and I'll be flood coating my charcuterie board with their tabletop resin as a final coat. In this video, I'll be talking about wood preparation, mixing techniques, and how to cure your resin for that perfect finish. For doing our charcuterie board, I'm going to use this tray, and I'm going to have timbers at either side, and I'll do a resin pour in the middle. The wood that we'll be using, I believe, is sycamore. It's a nice pale white wood, and I'll put a coloured base at the bottom, and we'll put our flowers on top of the coloured base, and I'm hoping that the colour of the white wood with the white colours of the flowers, or the cream colours of the flowers, will contrast well, especially whenever we put a coloured base down at the bottom. So with that, we'll get started. The deep pour epoxy resin is a two-part mixture, which means that we will use 2 parts of the A compound, which is the resin, and 1 part of the B compound, which is the hardener. One of the handy tricks when mixing your resin to make sure you get it the right way around is to just mark up in your jug what measurement you want to use of each compound, and if you follow that in your prep work, you'll be good. So I want to have about just under a litre of resin to go onto our base tray in the bottom colour. So I'm going to put 300 and then 600 mark, which will bring us up to 900. So to make sure we get our measurements right, we'll be using 300 of the hardener, which is the B compound, and 600 of the deep pour, which is the A compound. So just to show you, it's always good to put a pair of gloves on because the resin isn't the best for your skin, and it just means cleaning up is also easier as well. So these bottles have 2 caps on them. The first one is a safety cap. You press down and turn. The second one has another internal cap, and I find the easiest way to release this cap is to squeeze the bottle, which will help release the cap and it'll pop out. So we want to pour resin as accurately as we can. That's 300 of the B compound, which is the hardener, and then we'll top it up 600 of the epoxy A compound, and that'll bring us up to 900 in my jug. Now that we have our 2 compounds measured and poured, we'll start the mix. To make things a bit easier, I always use a paddle and a drill. You can of course do this by hand, but I think this is a lot easier. One of the things you have to think about when mixing your resin is your temperature. Now, I'm in a garage. It's kind of cold here, it's about 14 degrees. For resin to properly mix and cure, you need to have about a temperature range of 22 to 24 degrees, somewhere around there. So I'm going to have to put my resin in a hot water bath to try and raise that temperature up, which will allow the mixing to be more thorough. As resin is an oil-based product, you do not want to let water mix with it. So if you're using a hot water bath to raise your temperature, just make sure you don't contaminate your resin with your water. I'm going to move the camera down to let you see how the 2 compounds mix together, and they'll start out almost like crystally. It almost looks like ice floating in water, and when the 2 compounds are fully mixed, you'll see it'll turn clear. Okay, I'll be mixing for about 3 minutes. I can see all the iciness of those 2 layers of the hardener and the resin, and they've all fully blended, and it now looks clear. We have a few bubbles, but that's nothing to worry about. When the heat gets into the resin, those bubbles will naturally come up to the surface and get released. Okay, now that we've mixed both resins together, I'm going to transfer this resin to a fresh jug. I'm going to mix again. The purpose of this is that when we're mixing the resins, sometimes there could be some resin residue on the outside of this jug which hasn't been mixed, and that will spoil our resin pour. So if we pour the contents of this to a new jug, the contents will pour directly in the middle, and anything at the very end will scrape out and pour it into the middle, and that would be the resin that potentially could be unmixed. And then we'll give it another quick mix, and we'll know that everything is thoroughly mixed, and we can start to think about what colours we're going to use and how to pour into our charcuterie board tray. So you'll see as I'm doing this, I'm going to pour into the middle of this clean jug, keep on pouring into the center, and then we'll take a spatula. Okay, we'll set this jug to the side, and we'll change our spatula, or our mixing paddle, and as we scrape the contents of the first jug into the center of this jug, we'll then mix again, only for a minute or two, in the center of this new jug. I should also put it into the water bath to try and maintain the temperature. So I'll use a fresh bath with more hot water. I don't see any streaks left, so it looks like our resin's fully mixed. Now that the resin's mixed, we'll let it sit for a minute and heat up in the water bath, and this will give us the opportunity to have a look at the mica powders and to select a colour that works well for this resin charcuterie board with the flowers from the wedding bouquet. So this is a selection of the flowers we'll be using, and this is the mica powder that we'll be using for our base layer in our charcuterie board. There's 30 colours available to choose from. I'll just put them out roughly, and we'll pick a couple of colours to use for our base layer. Okay, so straight away I'm going to take out the colours which I don't think will work well, and we'll start to work with the colours that are left. I've selected the colour. I'm going to go for pearl white. I think that's going to look really great on this wedding charcuterie board. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to seal in our wood. As wood is a porous material, it'll draw in resin, especially in the end grain. So to prevent that from causing any problems, all we do is give it a rub with resin all over, and that will help seal the timber. For preparing our board for the resin pour, we're going to give it a quick clean, and then we're going to go and spray it with a release spray. And what that does is that when the board is cured in the tray, it'll prevent the resin from bonding to the tray and destroying it, and the resin board as well. It'll mean that when it's ready to come out, we can flip it over, push it down, and the board will naturally release. So to clean the board, I'm just going to use some alcohol wipes to get rid of any dust or dirt that may be in the tray. Doesn't take much spray either. Just give it a quick spray and then we'll be ready to pour. So this is where it gets messy. We're going to have to use our hands, which is why we need gloves on. And we'll try to keep it inside the tray to cut the mess down. And the resin is crystal clear now. All the bubbles are gone. The hot water bath helps raise the temperature and release any bubbles that we introduced during the mixing process. So just to explain why this is important again, we've just went and covered our board with clear transparent epoxy, which means that that clear transparent epoxy will get drawn into the board. As there's no colour in it, it's not going to cause any feathering or bleaching of the timber with the epoxy. As timber is a buoyant material, it will float when we pour the epoxy into the tray. So it's important to try and wedge our timbers into the tray to prevent them from raising when we pour our epoxy in. To do that, I've got a couple of little shims. I'm going to put them in the side, and then that'll help jam them in the board. So with that done, now it's time to add colour to our epoxy. As I've used this pearl white before, I'm going to put the rest of the sachet into the mix. I'll probably introduce bubbles back into the epoxy mix because I used my drill on the paddle. But once I pour the epoxy into my charcuterie board tray, I'm going to show you how I maintain the temperature, which will help release those bubbles once again. Now that we've poured the resin into the tray, it's time to move the tray into my heat tank. The heat tank will allow me to maintain the temperature of 22 to 24 degrees for 2 days, which is the time which is required for the deep pour resin to fully cure. The tank's sitting about 17 to 18 degrees because I lifted the lid off. It's allowed the temperature to drop a wee bit, but it'll climb back up within a few minutes. When you're letting your resin cure, you want to make sure it's on a level surface. Otherwise, you're going to have one side of your board is going to be shallow and the other side is going to be deep. This table in my workshop I know isn't level, so I'm going to use a spout level to make sure that all the corners are equal to give that nice equal level cure. Now that the resin is level, we'll come back in 2 days and we'll do our second stage of this charcuterie board. So a couple of days have passed and our resin is fully cured. It's rock hard and we'll be ready to do the next stage of our charcuterie board. For the next step, I'll be using a new product. I've never used this before, not in a project anyway. I've practiced with it, but it's Craft Resin's UV resin. And what that is it's a resin that comes pre-mixed in the bottle. We don't have our part A, part B compound. It's all in the bottle. You just pour it, and then you have to use the UV lamp that comes with the starter kit, and this will cure the resin in about 150 seconds is one of the settings. So yeah, it's quite fast, especially compared to 3-day curing time with the deep pour resin. So what my intention is, I'll show you what I've practiced on. On the charcuterie board, I want to go and write the names of the people the board is for. So this is what I have just practiced on, and as you can see, like I only did this about 5 minutes ago, and it's all touch dry as it is, and that's with the curing lamp. So the resin is transparent, clear, so we're going to have to go and pour some resin into a jug, and we'll add some black mica powder to create the black resin that we can cure in the 150 seconds or 2-3 minutes of time. So we'll start mixing that now. I'm not 100% sure of how much I actually need to pour or mix, but as it's a UV resin, as long as I keep it in a blackout container or the box that it comes in, I'll be able to use it whenever I like at any stage. It's not going to spoil. Okay, that I'm sure is plenty. So I'm sure 1 spoon of the pigment will be more than enough, since we're mixing such a small amount. Okay, that's it mixed. And I did go and buy little bottles with needle tip points on them. I'll start transferring the resin from the mixing pot into the jug, and they come with a wee funnel. So it looks like it has finally finished, and I'm just going to go and transfer the funnel out of the way, and there's our bottle ready to go. I said I've done a couple of tests. I've a fair idea how to write using the thin tip. It's going to be a bit tricky. Hopefully it's neat, tidy and legible, but if it doesn't look right, I can always wipe it off and start again. So I'm going to move the camera down so you can see a close-up shot of how I'm going to do this. And yeah, I'll let you, I'll probably not talk much, but I'll let you watch what I'm doing. Don't think I like that. I'm going to start again. I do like that now. There's a wee bit here, rub that off. Alright, let's go again. So the lamp is just plugged in through USB, and you can set it for 60 seconds, 90 seconds or 150 seconds. We're going to go for the 150. And that's it. The timer just went off, and it's now time to check that the UV resin is cured properly. The eight's kind of closed in a wee bit, which is a bit disappointing, but I'm happy with the rest of it. I think it all looks good, and that is all touch dry, which is awesome, as it means that we'll be able to start the next stage of our resin pour straight away. Now that we have our base layering and the lettering added, we now have to add our flowers. However, as the flowers will float, we can't pour the full depth of the clear resin to make up our charcuterie board. We'll have to do it in 2 separate stages. So we'll make about 600 mils of clear resin, and we'll soak our flowers in the resin and place our flowers where we want them on the board. And once that's dry, we'll then do a second coat of clear to bring the level up to the top layer of the charcuterie board. So I'm going to make up another batch of resin. It's going to be the exact same process as before. I'll be using the jugs, the drill. When that's done, I'll bring you back in and I'll have the flowers ready, and we'll start encasing the flowers in the board together. So we're all set up. We'll have our flowers, our epoxies all mixed up and ready for our pour. I'll put a pair of gloves on because this is going to be a bit of a messy one, because we're going to have to work the epoxy into the flowers. I'll also say that the flowers have been in silica sand for a week or so and left out to dry as well. So they're all very brittle and very dry. So that'll help with the preservation of them, so that if there's no damp or water in them, they won't go moldy while they're in the board encased. I'll start with putting a thin layer of epoxy into the tray. I'll just try to pour it as gently as I can. A lot of the air has been released because the epoxy has been in a water bath, a hot water bath, but just to try and not introduce bubbles back into it during this process. So I mentioned earlier, the idea of this is that we are placing the flowers and encasing them in epoxy for them to attach to the base of the charcuterie board, because whenever we put resin in, the flowers are going to naturally float. So we'll have to do a layer to bind the flowers to the base of the board, and once that's done, we'll have to do a second coat to bring the epoxy up to the top layer of the charcuterie board. So again, it's just, you have to work the epoxy into the flowers. There's not really a right or wrong way of doing this. So I'm just dunking them into what's left in this tray, or this jug, should I say, sorry. And then I'm going to transfer it over to the board. We'll have an opportunity to move these around a wee bit as we place things to see how they look, but we'll just start adding and seeing how things look as we work them into the board. And as the deep pour is quite a long drying time, there's plenty of time to move things around until you're happy with how they look. You gotta also remember not to have the flowers sitting up too high, because you don't want them sitting higher than potentially what the top of the last pour will be. You can see wee fragments of flower bits everywhere, so just try and tidy up what you can. I'm happy with the arrangement of the flowers now. I think I'll let it sit. I'll put it back into the heat tank, and after 2 days, whenever I come back, the flowers will be all encased within the epoxy that we've poured over everything, and they'll not be able to float. So a couple of days has passed, and the resin that was used to encase the flowers in the charcuterie board tray has now fully cured, and we can start our next step. So for the next step, we will be pouring more clear resin to bring the level up to the top of the timbers. And to make this batch of resin, I'll just be repeating the exact same process that we did before. So I'll go and I'll make up another batch of resin here. This time, again, it'll be clear, transparent resin. And when we're ready to pour, I'll bring you back and I'll show you the pour. I then gently poured the resin onto a spatula. This helped break the fall of the resin into the board to prevent air bubbles being introduced. Once all the resin was poured into my tray, I then used my blowtorch to help remove any of the bubbles which may have appeared. Now that my pour is complete, I then placed my tray into my heat tank for another 2 to 3 days. Our charcuterie board has had a few days drying, and I love this stage because this is the part where we get to take our resin pour out of the tray and we get to see what it's going to look like. With that, just pull it apart on the sides, and as we added the spray at the start, the grease spray, that will help the block of resin get released from the tray. So turn it upside down, and you can see already where the plastic is separating from the resin for the 2 different colors, and hopefully a couple of presses and it'll come free. Just like that. So it's quite chunky at the minute. There's a bit of a dome at the bottom. We'll have to plane all that back to get back to the wood. So we'll lose a few mils here, and on the sides, we'll square it up and then we'll flatten the top. But you can start to get a sense of what our charcuterie board is going to look like. And for this stage, we're going to be using quite a few live machines. So I'm going to go and use a time lapse, and I'll cut the sound down because they're quite noisy. I'll be wearing ear defenders, but at least you get to see the process and how I shape the boards from the resin pour into an actual charcuterie board shape. So we have all our cleaning and sanding and all the dusty work done, and the board is looking absolutely fabulous. The only thing that has annoyed me slightly is that when cleaning the top of the resin down, I've actually nicked into the flowers, and you can see there's a couple of little areas where there was no resin and there would have been air pockets, and those areas are now exposed, so they're leaving little kind of like cracks in the resin pour. So to fix that, I'm going to make up another small tiny batch of resin, and I'm just going to drop it into the little holes that have appeared, and when that's cured I'll just be able to sand them down and flatten it all off again. And what that means is that whenever we do our final top coat pour, which we're almost there, it will mean that the resin of the top coat will sit flat evenly across the whole board, whereas if we didn't fill these holes in, there would be little divots, little pockets where the resin has poured into these holes that have appeared. So I'll show you up close on the camera what I mean, but yes, it's a little bit more work, a little extra step, but it'll be worth it when we're done. So there's one hole there, you can kind of see it, and then the second one is over here. Not just as much, but I'd prefer to fill in these little holes and, I said, leave a better finish on our board. Now that our board's repaired and all the indents that were there before, the cracks that were there before are now gone, it's time to do our top flood coat. So I'll be using the tabletop epoxy, which gives a stronger scratch resistant finish, and we'll just be putting the transparent resin on top of the board. So as before, I'm going to make up another batch, and when that batch is ready, I'll bring you back. Now that we've our batch of top coat resin mixed, it's time to do the top coat pour on our charcuterie board. So this part is going to get quite messy, so if you're doing this, make sure that you have protection, gloves on, and lots of mats down, because quite possibly there's resin going to go everywhere. So I've just got wee spacers to raise the charcuterie board off the table, because we're going to pour it on top and then rub it all around the sides. We're going to leave the bottom without any resin on, and once the top coat is poured, we're going to flip it over and we're going to do a bottom coat, but that'll be in a few days' time. I'm going to move the camera down, and that'll give you a nice good shot of me pouring the resin onto the board. So I'm going to go around the sides first and rub the resin into the wood, and then we'll come back and we'll do the top. I'm just dipping my hand into the resin every time to get some to spread onto the charcuterie board. To cure my resin pieces in my workshop, because it can be a little dusty in here, I have a propagator tank and a heat mat. So the heat mat allows me to maintain the temperature of 22 to 24 degrees, and the casing on top keeps the dust off my workpieces. So I'm going to pop the charcuterie board in there, keep it safe. I will come back in a few days and we'll see the finished top coat of the resin on the top of the charcuterie board. Just wiping away any drips that may have formed. We're back again, and our charcuterie board top coat has fully cured and it looks perfect. The drips, or the flow of the resin, had went down the sides, and as I kind of expected, it was causing a lot of drips on the bottom. So I've just went and cleaned up the bottom again, chipped off the drips and sanded it down again for a nice even surface to do our final coat. But before we do our final coat of resin on the underside, we have to go and put a latex glue around the sides so that whenever we do our coat again and it drips over the edge and it drips on the underside of the charcuterie board, the latex glue or the rubber glue will be able to peel it off, and that will then chip off any drips that form without damaging the surface of our board. Once this is dried, we can then go and tidy up the outside perimeter where it's kind of dripped over the sides. That's not going to cause any problems or issues. It'll easily just rub off and we'll be able to continue with our board. I'm going to tidy up here and I'll be back in 24 hours. Our latex glue has set and there's a nice firm finish off on it. So what we need to do now is flip our board over, and I've cleaned up the bottom for maybe the glue that dripped around the bottom, and we're going to go and pour our final mix of resin over the bottom of the board and let it drip down around the sides all over. And with the latex glue, the latex rubber around the edge, if any drips appear here, the plan is that they'll all just pop off with the rubber seal that we've put on top of the charcuterie board. Now that we have our coat poured, we'll have to put it back into the heat tank and let it sit for another 36 or 48 hours to let it fully cure again. The top coat is now cured, that will be placed on the bottom, but as you can see, we've got a row of drips all around the edge. Now, our silicone hopefully has caught all those drips, but we'll find out once we start peeling off the rubber silicone, and hopefully it'll leave a nice clean surface around the edge. So as you can see, that came off really well. There's a few areas that I'll have to go and just maybe use my scalpel and just scratch off any of the top sharp edges that are there, but it's almost came off perfectly, or as I would have expected. So I'm gonna go and clean it up a wee bit more, and once that's done, I'll bring you back. And our charcuterie board is now finished. I think it looks fantastic. I'll be sending it off very soon to its owner, and thank you all for watching my videos. I hope you enjoyed them. And if you'd like to make something with epoxy resin, make sure to check out all the different products that Craft Resin have. Thanks again.